Hello, UNbothered family. Thank you for joining me for part 2 of Queen Califia and the California Blacks of the Zai Empire. Now, if you have not listened to part 1, please stop and go back and listen to it. It's a lot of jewels in part 1 that you definitely don't want to miss. Now, contrary to popular opinion, no group of people suffered as much from the gold rush as the California Blacks and other native peoples. Estimation of the numbers in the area of what is now called California before the arrival of Europeans ranged from 10,315,000 or more, a calculation never officially reported. Even before the gold rush, the population had plummeted to 5 to 2.5 million due to slavery, Euro invasion, and Christian document of discovery, plus Mexican, Indian, and Spanish wars, along with vigilante and militia mass unalivings, all had taken a toll on the original people. So on April 12th of 1850, California passed the so-called Act for the Government and Protection of the Indians. This act allowed any white settler to force any Indian found to be without means of support to work for him. Since Indians could not testify against a white person in court, any Indian could be seized as a virtual slave under the new law. Many settlers didn't even bother with the law and purchased Indian children outright. Fortunes were made on the sale of women and children. The editorial appearing in the California Marysville Appeal newspaper illustrates this practice. It is from the mountain tribes that the white settlers draw their supply of kidnapped children, educated as servants, and women of purpose, of labor, or lust. These are partners of the state whose sole occupation has been to steal young children and squaws and dispose of them for handsome prices to the settlers, who, willing to pay $50 to $60 for a young N-word to cook and wait upon them, or $100 for a likely young girl. In 1851, message to the California legislature, then California Governor Peter H. Burnett promised, and I quote, "A war of extermination will continue to be waged between the two races until the Indian race becomes extinct." California paid $1 million revenue from the gold fields to militias that hunted down and slaughtered natives at will in 1852. Moving along to 1853, newspapers cheered on the statewide campaign. In 1853, the Eureka Herald called on the government to provide aid to enable the citizens of the North to carry on a war of extermination until the last redskin of these tribes has been unalived. Extermination is no longer a question of time. The time has arrived. The work has commenced, and let the first man who says treaty or peace be regarded a traitor. Other newspapers voice similar sentiments. In order to clear the way for white settlement, the United States Senate in 1853 authorized these committees to negotiate treaties with the Indian tribes of California. Of the over 250 indigenous nations, 18 treaties were negotiated. The handful of tribes agreed to give away millions of acres of land in exchange for the U.S. government's promise to protect the lands with adequate water and game to sustain them in their way of life. These land would have contained about 7.5 million acres, or 7.5% of the land area of California. The 18 tribes started moving to their new land location only to find out that the Senate had refused to ratify their treaties. Instead of treaties, a system of military posts on government-owned reservations was implemented. Each would put into place a system of discipline and instruction. The cost of the troops would be borne by the surplus production of Indian labor. No treaties were to be negotiated. Instead, they would be invited to assemble within these reserves. So moving on to 1855, towns offered bounty hunters cash for every Indian scalp they obtained. Rewards ranged from $5 for every severed head in Shasta City in 1855 to 25 cents for a scalp in Honey Lake in 1855. Now understand, they had to get rid of the Redskins, the American Indian, the Aboriginal American, the copper-colored tribes are the ones who did not sign the treaty. They were the lighter skins, the newer ones that came to sign the treaty. Right? Keep that in mind. Now, not only that, other regions passed laws that called for the collective punishment for the whole village for crimes by natives, up to the destruction of the entire village and all of its inhabitants. They wanted to make sure they took every drop of land, every bit of power, and there was no coming back. These policies led to the devastation of over 200 native California communities. In 1857, the state issued $400,000 in bonds to pay for anti-Indian militias. In 1870, the California census only recorded the population at 32,000. However, that did not take into account the blacks and other natives who ran away and joined ranks with the Seminoles and/or other native nations, or those who picked up and moved to safer locations. The black Califians were not a part of Northern California's 18-tribe treaty negotiations of 1853. They continued to valiantly fight the oppressive invaders until the late 1890s. The gold rush signaled the beginning of the end for the land's first people. The gallant California blacks, one of the last great native nations to stand up and defend their ancestral homeland, America, Utah, Atlan, land of the blacks, was over. Well, for those of you who made it this long, I'd like to thank you for listening. Hopefully, you were able to get some education on how this great nation ended up falling. I know a lot of people hear about who they were and what they did and what type of imprint they left, but how they disappeared, people don't know. They're actually still around. And as you see, even when they started with the census back then, many of these people were not counted, just like the census of today. Many Native Americans, Aboriginal, copper-colored Americans were reclassified from American, Indian, Negro, Black. Basically, anything they can call us to keep us from claiming our birthright. But of course, remain unbothered.